And yeah, I don't know if I know how to make you. Okay. That's fine. Okay, no, I'll get it together. So to make you the co-host, okay, 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 bye.
I go apply because I have no brain. I use it. No! I thought it was funny. I can do it. What did Oliver say to the send help video? I don't know.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, hi. Well, there's two of us.
I know Mark Rudolph is on his way.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Everything okay?
Everything is okay. Yeah, Mark, I don't know why Mark couldn't get in with the email and the password I gave him, so I don't know.
I didn't even need a password. Hi, Nancy. I didn't need a password.
No, to log into the
Oh, to be the host.
But it's okay. I can start it. I can start the meeting.
Yeah. Oh, we even get Nancy live.
Good
Not just a
morning.
picture. Hi, hi.
Everybody doing okay?
Hi, Nancy.
Hi,
Yeah,
Rita.
but you may have heard there's this coronavirus out there.
Really? No,
Yeah.
I don't think I heard about it. I guess I need to get up to speed. Are you kidding? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Craziest time ever. Rini, have you been getting my recent emails? I hope this time.
Yes, and I asked Maris Rosenfeld to send you the survey.
So I did it. I submitted it again last night. I did have it, and I thought I submitted it. So late last night, I sent it to both of you.
Oh, okay. If you submitted it, then you're good. And maybe I didn't see. Maybe she sent me a list that didn't have you on it for some reason. But I'm sure she has it.
I hope so.
Yeah. No, I'll check. I'll check with her.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
No
it.
problem.
You know, some of my emails we discovered are going into people's spam folders, and my computer guy says it's not anything I have control over.
Yeah.
It's settings on other people's computers. So I'm always in the habit of checking my spam folder because
Me
I'm
too.
told a lot of my emails go into people's spam. So
Right.
you know.
Yeah, me too. I know it's aggravating.
So that should be the least of our concerns, right?
Well, it's annoying.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Ellie, 2 days in a row.
Yeah.
Love it.
So,
Hi, guys.
Hi, Michael. How have you been?
Is there
I'm okay.
any way that before this you get going, Michael, that someone can send me the text for your talk in another format, because I'm at work and the file is like blocked. It like won't open. So is there like
Really?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh.
Michael, do you want to email it to her, or you want me to look for it?
Yeah, can you email it? Rini, is that easy?
I'm
gonna forward it to you from Michael's email, and maybe that'll.
Yeah, just forward it for me from Mike. Yeah.
Could you send it to my CJE email, michelle.stern@cje.net?
Sure.
Because then I'll know for sure if it'll open.
Michelle.stern@cje.net. Yeah, here we go.
Thank you so much. I was trying to open it this morning and it wouldn't open. Thank you.
Yeah, if anyone else needs it, I have it. In fact, I'm just gonna see. I think I have a link for the texts. I'm gonna see if I put that in the chat, if that helps. Chat. Now, to everyone. Yeah, that link works. So if you need the text there, that link in the chat box that I just put there will take you to the text. Hi, Norman. Great to see you. Oh, you're muted. Are you in Minnesota?
Okay. I'm in Minnesota, right? But somehow it's easier to get to these meetings from Minnesota now with Zoom.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I was
Welcome.
in Chicago 2 weeks ago to visit my new granddaughter. So
Oh, nice.
Mazel tov.
Awesome.
thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to everyone.
Should we wait one more minute?
Sure.
Okay, and is Mark going to be able to get on?
He is supposed to.
Thank you so much. I just got the text, Rini, from
Oh,
Okay,
great.
good.
Great, great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That's Marilee. Oh, Steve Danker has an emoji.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, how are
Hey,
you?
Hey, Michael, how are you?
good. Rabbi Denker, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's not, you know what, the advantage of this thing is I can now join you guys from time to time.
Yeah.
So glad.
Steve was a rabbi for many years in Chicago, so.
Where was he? Where were you the rabbi and where are you now?
As an assistant and associate at Temple Shalom, I did a couple of part-time things in the West in DeKalb, taught at Loyola, DePaul, and actually followed Michael at Loyola. Then had the congregation in Water Tower Place for 10 years, and then was exiled to Ohio. No, we moved to a congregation in the Cleveland area.
Oh, I have a son in the Cleveland area.
What does he do?
He's at the Schechter school there.
Oh, he's teaching.
He's the assistant associate head of school and the head of Jewish studies.
All right. We haven't heard from them much lately. I'm going to change my lighting. We haven't
Okay.
Ready?
We should probably start. It's 9:05 and
Okay, good.
people have driven far. And the reason we usually start when we had sessions, normally we'd start at 10, is because some people were coming from the burbs and the western suburbs and far, Naperville and places. So it was much easier to traffic to start at 10. But we certainly don't face that now. So, okay. Thank you for that kind introduction. I think I know everyone, we all know each other, I believe. Or I know everyone at least. We'll just begin by saying welcome. What I'd like to do is as follows. Just let me give the origins of this. And so first of all, thanks to Rini for organizing and for giving me an opportunity, whether it's my Yetzer Hara or Yetzer HaTov, I'm not sure, to be able to share some Torah with you. The origins of this is based on some work by Alyssa Gray. Some of you may know her. She's a wonderful Talmud professor at HUC in New York. Really lovely. I mean, a lovely person. She's also a really fine scholar and she posts on Facebook, not on every page of the daf, but on a regular basis. And she really writes interesting things. So I suggest you becoming friends with her. She has a book out on tzedakah, but this part of what I used in preparation was an article she wrote. It's on the last page of the sources, so called Redemptive Almsgiving and the Rabbis of Late Antiquity. That chapter was integrated into her book on tzedakah. And so I had, I forget in the context, I originally came across the article, but realized it certainly tied in with this time of the year as well. I have a sefer I picked up a number of years ago called Bein Kisei LaEser. It's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's by a very interesting, the author of the sefer is a very interesting fellow, Eliezer Brot. Some of you, if you look at the Sfarim website that has all these interesting articles, Sfarim, I think it's .com or .org, there's all these interesting articles that some people turn into books. Mark Shapiro writes there a lot. Other people, really interesting things, variety of topics that are covered. So he put together a whole series of essays here on the times between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And one of them is about Nitinat Tzedakah be'aseret Yemei Tshuva, giving tzedakah during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. I actually copied the article for someone, so I can send it to Rini after the session, and she can send it out as well. And so just putting these two together, I thought it would be an interesting, at least I found it interesting, thing to discuss before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, particularly because we know the role that tzedakah plays, certainly in the liturgy, which is the beginning of the sources. Now, I am not going to go into all the academic detail that Alyssa Gray goes into. By the way, if you want to see the Alyssa Gray article, there's a wonderful website, academia.edu. I highly suggest, it's free. You can pay some money for an advanced one. I mean, I haven't done that, but it's a wonderful website where many academics post their articles. I don't know how it works with copyright ever, but it's perfectly permissible apparently. And you can find, if you're looking for an academic article, you don't necessarily have access to some of the free sources through certain libraries. Academia.edu is a wonderful resource. So you can just type in Alyssa Gray and it'll list all her articles that she's put up on the website. So you can certainly find the article there. So I'm not going to get into all the details in which she tries to mention in passing, but which she will discuss redemptive almsgiving with an introduction in a minute, but in which she suggests basically that the redemptive element is more of a Tanaitic and Palestinian Amoraic phenomena than a Babylonian Amoraic phenomena, although you certainly find passages in the Bavli, which we'll see, but she sees most of those as coming from Palestinian source. So I don't want to get into all those technical details. It's worth it certainly to take a look at the articles, okay, so I think that will be the formal introduction. Now, people, if you want to go on mute, but please feel free to go off mute and ask any questions at any time, or comments or something. Hopefully something that's relevant to what we're discussing. I'll make sure I silence my, oh good, I already silenced my phone.
Michael, can you tip your laptop screen a little bit so your whole face is in the, there we go.
Yeah, but I think I have to hold it. I'm not on a laptop, I'm on
oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm on my iPad. So I really should sit on a pillow maybe. Let me get a pillow. It may help.
While he's doing that, the Academia website, once you use it a little bit, they send you recommendations of things you might be interested in based on what you've chosen to read in the past.
Oh yeah, I get a daily.
A daily suggestion, right?
And it also tells me Michael Balinsky has been quoted in 100 papers.
Right.
And if you pay the money, you can see where you're quoted. Hey, that's a little better. But I certainly am too cheap to pay. And I only know myself as being quoted footnoted by one person. So, okay. So let's begin. I'm going to assume you have the sources. I apologize. This is the first stuff I've ever made on Safaria, which is generally very good, but I never made a actual source sheet from Safaria before, and so it's much longer than it needs to be. I'll work on it. I couldn't get into my Bar Ilan for some reason, so I ended up using Safaria. So just to begin with, two sources we certainly are familiar with.
Had computer problems too.
Yeah. All right.
He had computer problems. He couldn't get into his Bar Ilan account.
All right. Okay. So we begin just certainly the passage everyone's familiar with. Rosh Hashanah Yikatev and Yom Sim Kippur Yechatemun with Unasana Tokef. And we all know how it ends. Utshuva Tfilot Staka Mavirin et Roa HaGezera. Right? So this is certainly, it's an absolute key theme that we certainly are familiar with. And the question, it's certainly a very old question. And there's, what does it mean that Tshuva Tzedakah Utfila Mavirin et Roa HaGezera? Does it mean that if you do these things, whatever is decreed for you in the above paragraph, whatever destiny has been inscribed for you will be torn, to use the language of the ripped up, to use the language of the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, or people talk about, because we know often that life doesn't seem to work that way. And so some people suggest Tshuva Tefillah Staka Mavirin et Roa HaGezera, right? Those things don't annul necessarily the evil degree, but the evilness of the decree. So you're still, have meaning, purpose, are able to do things even if you're facing moments of crisis. And we've all probably spoken about this and taught this in a variety of contexts. But what is significant here is that, aside from Tshuva and Tefillah, one of the questions is, what is tzedakah doing here? Why is tzedakah one of these? We could have talked about Tshuva, Tefillah, Shmira, Shabbos, right? Shabbos is Keneged Kol HaMitzvot Torah. So it certainly could have been, and why not emphasize Shabbos being the thing that we should do? None of us would feel uncomfortable saying that. But so the question of tzedakah really sort of stands out here. And it takes on almost this redemptive element. Tzedakah here is not, it's not just, well, we'll give money. It's going to, whether one takes in the more narrow thing, it's going to save your life potentially. It's going to rip up the decree, tear the decree. What is there about tzedakah that's singular to tzedakah? Again, with tshuva and tefillah, is there certain things that they have in common? So we'll deal with some of that, but I just wanted to raise that question because this certainly comes up high holidays, and just another example of it on the second page. And this really forms the basis of that Eliezer Brodt article I mentioned. The Rambam, this is halacha 4. He already has a few halachas before this. In chapter 3 in Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam describes the world as being balanced between, I'll say, merits and demerits. And that each year the world is judged. And if demerits outweigh the merits, that leads to destruction. He talks about this in the form of the individual, and then he also talks about this in the context of the worlds as well, which creates a certain sense of that when we coming into, and if you look at the first,
This meal looks wonderful.
All right, folks, we can hear you. So if you're having side statements, could you go on mute, please? And just come off mute if you want to comment, ask a question, agree, disagree, okay? I think, Steve, Bob, we've picked up a couple of your informal comments. So
Brilliant comments.
if you can just make sure you're on mute. Unless, again, if you have something to say to anyone relevant to this, please speak up. Please speak up. Sometimes interactive stuff on Zoom's a little harder, but please speak up. So the Rambam there in the introduction sets this frame to really think about one's individual and as an individual and how one impacts on the world as well. That one action can make a huge, significant difference, and that's one of the things one is judged for at this time of the year. Does one's merit outweigh one's demerits? And we're not necessarily talking about quantity. You can certainly be talking about quality. And that's a consciousness to enter, in particular, consciousness to have this time of the year, that one action, one deed can really change it for the whole world. And then the Rambam continues in Halacha Dalet, having given that introduction, even though blowing of the shofar is a command from the Torah, an explicit command from the Torah, without any reason giving for it, it's gezeres hakasuv. The Torah demands it. Remez yeshbo. There is a hint. There's a meaning to it beyond simply fulfilling the mitzvah to blow a shofar. Kolomar uru yishnei mishnantchem v'nirdamim hikitzu mitardin meichem v'chavsu b'maasechem v'chizru b'tshuva v'zichru borachem. Wake up. All right? When the shofar is supposed to wake you up, examine your contact, and repent and turn in repentance to your Creator. I'm sure you know the old story that's a little bit less relevant now with the onset of phones, of the Israeli guy who's blowing, it doesn't have to be Israeli, maybe Israeli, he's blowing a shofar, in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning. And so they asked him, why are you blowing your shofar at 2 in the morning? He says, well, I want to know what time it is. Well, they said, if you want to know what time it is, why don't you get a watch? And he says, well, during the day I can manage, I can find out and ask people, what time it is, not a problem. But at night, if I want to know the time, I blow the shofar. I said, well, how does that help? He says, well, I'll just blow the shofar, and before you know it, someone's screaming at me, what are you doing blowing a shofar? Don't you know it's 2 in the morning? So the sense of the purpose of the shofar is to wake us up. Okay. People have forgotten what's really true, etc. Look at your souls, look at your lives, improve your ways, do good things. Abandon abandon your evil way, thoughts that are not pure, that are not good, important for the Rambam. And then he continues, therefore a person should view themselves all year as being right in the middle between merits and demerits. Similarly, the whole world is balanced between merits and demerits. Right? If you sin, one sin can destroy it for yourself and for the whole world and cause the world to be destroyed. One deed, one mitzvah can push everything to a positive way and not lead to destruction, and this will lead to being saved. Shenemar v'tzadik yisod olam, the tzaddik is the foundation of the world. There's one act. The tzaddik comes and does this one act and saves the world. And then he continues. And because of this, Nahagu kol beit Yisrael laharbot b'tzedakah u'b'maasechem tovim v'lasok b'mitzvot b'Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim yeter mikol hashana. All right. Therefore, a person should increase their tzedakah and their good deeds and be involved with mitzvot from now more than the whole year, from between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then he concludes about people waking up, davening early, perhaps sleepless, etc. All right. So again, we have this example. The Rambam does expand it to Masim Tovim and Lasok b'mitzvot, but the only one he specifies is tzedakah, right? The only one he specifies is tzedakah. And what is tzedakah going to do here? Tzedakah is going to save the whole world, all right? Because it's going to be this, it could be this one mitzvah will balance the scale for yourself and balance the scale for the whole world. Okay, so what's the problematic here? What's problematic about this? Well, I'm going to assume and telling you it's problematic. But anyone find anything problematic? Yeah, Michelle. I can't see everyone necessarily, so just speak up. But Michelle is on my screen, on my first page.
So one of the things that this reminds me of, just on a practical level, is like there's a lot of people in our world who up their tzedakah or volunteering around like Thanksgiving or Christmas, or, you know, like that I guess the difference here is like that it's making a theological statement about our impact on the universe. But that to me is problematic, like that people are being pushed to do something more connected to a holiday when there are needs year round.
All right, good. No, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, we do talk about, you know, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur being the special time if it connects with judgment, etc. But no, but fair enough. Anyone else? Norman, if you raised your hand, did you raise your hand? No, yes, you didn't. Anyone else? If you do, just speak up because I can't necessarily see you.
Tzedakah is the one lowest common denominator that anybody can do. You don't have to return an observing. You don't have to go out of your way if it's too convenient to do good deeds. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but allows more people to become involved in doing what is right. And that's why the word for tzedakah means righteous, and even the lowest individual can make this contribution.
All right, good, good. All right, but I think there's one element missing here. And that is,
Michael?
Yeah.
It seems to me that what's problematic to me is that this whole notion of the balance of the weights in terms of what's the judgment on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That the reason we're doing it at that time is, in a sense, to save ourselves, and not because it's the right thing to do or a good thing to do, or because it's going to help people in need or whatever.
Yeah, fair enough. And what's interesting is actually, and the Broit article from that Sefer deals with the question that there's no source for the Rambam on this specifically, and then he just lists, and I'll go through a few of them of ideas people have why the Rambam would say this, but there's no explicit source that the commentaries on the Rambam give specifically for this, and that's what Broit says. I just want to add one element here, and that tzedakah here is not about giving to the poor. The poor are absent. It's about what it's going to do for me, and maybe balance the scale in the world. But what's absent here is the poor, and that becomes one of the elements, or perhaps one of the, I'll say elements, questionable elements with a question mark, of this notion of redemptive almsgiving, which is, I guess, the term that's used, which is the notion, and now that Now, you certainly find this in, and this is just from Melissa, that you find this in Christianity. You find some who claim in Jewish texts it's not there, but I think we're going to see texts where it really is there, as well as some texts that seem to back away from it as well. But it certainly comes up at this time of the year, where the sense of tzedakah here is less about helping the poor and much more about our redemption, right? We're going to save the world. Yes, Suzanne.
So, I mean, it's interesting because basically what you're talking about is kind of doing the right thing for the wrong reason, in a way. I mean, not the wrong reason, but as long as you're doing the right thing, does the motivation matter?
Well, fair enough. But the question, though, becomes if in that process, what happens to the contact with the poor? In other words, do we lose the face of the poor in the process? That's what I mean as the question. Do they become vehicles for our redemption as opposed to specifically, helping them? Now, again, I'm not saying I agree with you. This is perfect. Give tzedakah. I'm not suggesting anything that's opposed to it. I just want to see how some of it plays out in some of the sources, as opposed to, now you can certainly talk about tzedakah. We're doing tzedakah to help the poor, and certainly that should be a motivation. But we get into this notion of redemptive almsgiving, which I'm suggesting certainly has an element here in high holidays. Just quoting from some people, the doctrine that functions for the theological benefit of the rich, that in some elements of Christian almsgiving, the rich provide the alms, but receive redemption from sin. The poor accept the alms and pray for the benefactors. Over time, it becomes less clear who's the donor and who's the benefactor. In a certain sense, the donor becomes the poor person, who's praying on behalf of the rich person, who's giving money on, behalf of the poor. And again, the question that what happens to the poor in this process. All right, so that's sort of a question I want to look at through a variety of sources. But I do want to, before we get there, I just want to share with you. I don't have text on this, but it's in the Broid article, which you'll get. Just some of the commentaries that are post Rambam and some Achronim who deal with this question: why this emphasis on giving tzedakah during Aseret Yemei Tshuva? The point of the Rambam with this. One commentary, Rabbeinu Ephraim, who's France 12th, 13th century, quotes the verse, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. All right, we know from Shoftim, justice, justice thou shalt pursue. Liman tiyeh v'yarashta et haaretz. In order that you should live and inherit the land that God is giving you. All right? So he plays on why this emphasis on tzedakah during this time of the year. Leman Yerashta. All right, someone's not on mute, please. Leman Yerashta is the same letters as Tishrei. Again, that's a playing out of it. These aren't the greatest, formal of answers. Okay. The one commentary from the 1700s, Tzvi Hirsch Horowitz, Ikar Takana Lavir et Hagazera, Hu al Yadei Tzedakah. That tzedakah is one of the key ways one's judgment will be will be removed during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. There's a quote from a Risacha Tamar quotes from Shkalim that Rechia Bar Abba elders would take what people gave them and give to the poor, and they would give it specifically between Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. The Lechem Mishnah talks about tshuva and notion of the shofar, tells us to investigate our deeds. So in response to that, what should we do? Do good deeds and give to the poor. Shlomo Ashkenazi of the 1500s says the poor should be willingly accepting tzedakah during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Why? Because in order to give merit to the givers, right? Which goes back to the question of who's the benefit of tzedakah for. Okay, I mean, there's various other approaches. Give tzedakah during this time, and do chesed during this time and give tzedakah, so God will do tzedakah chesed with us. All right, and Bright has them listed, and when we send out the article, you can certainly see them there. But what I want to look at,
Yeah, just a question. At what point in the evolution of tzedakah does it go from a focus on giving to the poor to kind of benefiting the social welfare from institutions to all of the needs that are now encompassed in the terms of the nonprofit sectors? Is there any of that in the early literature as well, or is that just a modern?
Well, I guess people have written about this. I'm not sure if is it Artursky's article years ago, etc. But there is a notion, certainly in rabbinic times, of the kupa of tzedakah, that you have certain sort of central, what's the term for them? Community chest or money for tzedakah that people could get, and there is this. Of course, we have this ambivalence between, on one hand, wanting to deal with the face of the poor, and the other hand, wanting issues of dignity and kavod, and do you have community chest type thing can resolve those types of things if there are central places that people can get. There's some Alyssa Gray has a suggestion in her article that for some of the sages, may have been some of the Tanaim, just some of the things she's seen. You look up the article, make sure I got it right, that they may not have had that, did not see as having that much direct contact with the poor as part of their lives. And other people did. They would support, you have to give tzedakah, but not necessarily be the ones, actively involved in the lives of the poor. And beyond that, you'll have to do a search and look up some articles.
Michael?
Yeah.
Two comments. First of all, I think David was really asking, when did the concept of tzedakah become wider so that if you give to your day school, that's tzedakah, as opposed to giving to the poor? But I also want to make the comment.
All right, that's a later phenomenon, and that is a tension between supporting communal institutions and the actual poor, and then how that balances out. That's a whole important separate topic.
But I also wanted to comment to maybe give a little balance to the discussion of the Rambam, is that in this context, the tzedakah serves the donor more than the recipient, in a sense, because it puts the weight on the scales. But in his discussion of Simchat Yom Tov, he has the emphasis on giving to that without giving tzedakah or giving to those in need, it's just Simchat Kreso. He's just stuffing his face on Yom Tov. And
But the Rambam there is also specifically reacting to the samachta to those categories that are also there, right? So there's certainly a certain. I want to be clear that this is just one Rambam talking about this time of the year. That's, I think, just one example of it. I'm not trying to say in any way that this is the whole Rambam's view on it. So what I want to do is look at some of the sources that have this, some of the Jewish sources that have this sort of redemptive element to this redemptive almsgiving element in some of the sources. Alyssa Gray makes the point that there are more Palestinian sources than Babylonian sources, even though you will see some of the text in the Bavli as well. All right, so the first example you have is from the Tosefta, and we're going to compare it a little bit to the Yerushalmi as well. It's the story of Munbaz. Munbaz was the king. He's the king of Adi Ben, if I pronounce it correctly, at the end of the Second Temple, which was a small kingdom north of Syrian Euphrates, and some Jews had, I think his mother had studied with some Jews who passed through and converted, and her children even sent some troops supposed to support the Jewish uprising, and eventually Munbaz became king. So he's a convert. The family was converted. Okay, so it's not like the English is monobasis, but Munbaz went and gave away to the poor kol otzrotav, all of his treasures, b'shnei b'tzurat, in a time of famine, in a time of crisis. So Amru lo achiv, his brother, sent him the following message: your ancestors stored up treasures and increased the wealth left for them by their ancestors, right? But you went and gave away all these treasures, both your own and those of your ancestors. He gave it all away to help people. So Munbaz replied to them, my ancestors stored up treasures for this world, this lower. It's the lower place, understanding as this world. But I, through giving charity, have stored up treasures for the above. All right, it could be the heavenly world. There's a slight girsa change between the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi. As it says, faithfulness will spring up from the ground below, and righteousness will look down from the sky. My ancestors stored up treasures for this world where the human hand can reach, but now I'm storing up treasures for translates the non-material world where the human hand cannot reach. As it says, righteousness and justice are the foundations of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness shall go before you. And he continues, my ancestors stored up treasures for a type that produce no real benefit, but I have stored up treasures for the type that do produce benefits. As it says in scripture, tell the righteous that it shall be well for them, for they shall reap the benefits of their deeds. My ancestors stored up treasures of money, but I have stored up treasures of souls. As it says in scripture, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and a wise man saves the souls of poor people. My ancestors stored up treasures that eventually after their death would benefit only others, but I have stored up treasures that will benefit myself both in this life and death. As it says in scripture, shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. My ancestors stored up treasure in this world, but I have stored up treasures for myself in the world to come. As it says, your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Now that final pasuk is from the Haftorah for Yom Kippur. Now what's interesting about this is that there's very little emphasis. It just says what he does, but there's really very little emphasis on the poor. I've stored up treasures for myself in the world to come, right? There is a greater sense of this almost redemptive element for the person, for him doing it. And there's not really a major direction here or facing so much to the actual crisis of the actual crises of the poor. Now you see this also in the Talmud Yerushalmi. There's a couple of differences. One is that it doesn't here talk about above and below as it talks about here. Vani, you look on the first page, second line of the page, second line to the bottom. Vani ganasti bashamayim. So it talks about between eretz and shamayim as opposed to upper and lower. But particularly also the end of it, which is crucial. It's similar to the Tosefta that my ancestor stored up treasures in this world, but I have stored up treasures. V'gani ganasti le'olam haba. Except in the Tosefta, you have the verse, "Your righteousness shall go before you," which is the verse from Yom Kippur, from the Haftorah for Yom Kippur. And here we have the quote from Mishlei. If you look at the end of the Yerushalmi text, "Utzedakah tatzil mimavet," and charity, tzedakah, will save from death. Right here, you have this explicit reference to more than just your righteousness going before you, but the giving of tzedakah will save your life. All right. Not saying that the giving of tzedakah will save the life of the poor who you're helping. The giving of tzedakah will actually save your life. And so here it has this, certainly this strong redemptive element. Now, I left you the last line of the Yerushalmi because then the Yerushalmi, that's the quote. The tzedakah tatzil mimaves. Then the Yerushalmi asks, below me, the person will not die. What, charity? I mean, it's an obvious, what do you mean charity saves from death? You don't want to die. What should you do? Give charity. But we know what happens to people wealthy people who give charity all their life. What happens at the end? They die. But in here, it seems to be saying, we'll see this in other sources, that no, tzedakah tatzil mimaves, charity saves from death. So the Yerushalmi asks right away, below me, the person isn't going to die. Ela shelo yamut le'olam haba. All right, they'll get olam haba. All right, but we'll see this in some other sources where no, it has this real redemptive element of actually potentially saving your life. And we have some stories again about that. But again, in all of this, who is the beneficiary of the tzedakah? It's the person who's giving it. It's not. Now, the poor certainly benefit, but I don't know if it's a danger, but certainly these sources certainly also emphasize the sense that it benefits the person who's giving it. That benefits the person who's giving it as well. So, as if my eyes are not so much focused on the poor, there's this benefit that is happening to us as well. Now you see another example, though, with with some difference. I think I forgot to give you the text in the Yerushalmi, but you can look it up. And by the way, Safaria has the Yerushalmi. It's easy enough to get it. But this is from the Yerushalmi, Shabbat 6:10. The English, now there is an English translation of the Yerushalmi which I used from Jacob Neusner. The Neusner translation has value. It has been critiqued, legitimately so, by many, and even in Neusner for this passage, the Yerushalmi uses his translation from the Tosefta, which I took from Neusner also, just the translation, and it misses out that difference between the Yerushalmi and the Tosefta, particularly the ending. And let's consider with Shemaim Va'aretz apart, but particularly the ending, the notion that not just righteousness going before you, but tzedakah tatzamimav, it's the charity actually saves from death and has that powerful redemptive element. The Yerushalmi Shabbat, a similar type of, a story with one difference. Two disciples of Rabbi Hanina were going out to cut wood. They saw an astrologer. He said, these two will go out but not come back. All right? When they went out, an old man met them and said to them, acquire merit through me, for I have gone 3 days without tasting any food. Now, it's very interesting, the use of the phrase there. Acquire merit through me, right? I'm going to do you almost a favor, right? Because I've gone 3 days without food. So they had with them a single circle of figs, which they divided in half, and half of which they gave him. They did the right thing. He ate it and he prayed for them. He said to them, may you live out this day just as you have helped me to live out this day. Okay? So the poor person prays for them here. There is that act of prayer. They went forth and came back whole. Now, there were people in that place who had heard the report of the astrologer, and they said to him, now, didn't you tell us these two people would go out and not come back? And he said, there's a liar in this spot. For my meaning, maybe almost to himself, for my astrological sciences fooled me. All right, something went wrong. Even so, they still investigated it. They went and looked into the bundles they were bearing, and they found a snake cut in half, one in the knapsack of one of them, and one part in the knapsack of the other. So they said to the disciples, now, so they asked these two guys, look, you have this poisonous snake, but it ends up cut in half and didn't poison you. They said to the disciples, what sort of good thing did you do today? They repeated the story about the figs. And the astrologer said, now what can I do when the God of the Jews is appeased by a half circle of figs? Okay? Now, in this case, the poor also pray, correct, for the disciples, for the Talmidim. So it's not so much automatic, but again, what saves them here? The fact that they did this act of compassion and tzedakah to the poor. All right, it's certainly a parallel example of charity saving, of charity saving from death. And now you also have a source in the Psikta that's a little bit different, but that does talk about the Psikta de Rav Kahana, that does talk about a sense of the special quality of the poor with God. So Avar Rayulani of Daroma, it was cited Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, or God said, Ata yesh lecha arba b'nei batim, you have 4 members of your household, Vani yesh li arba b'nei batim, and I have 4 members of my household. Ata yesh lecha arba b'nei batim, you have 4, bincha, bitcha, v'decha v'yamatcha, or right? Your son, your daughter, your servant, your male servant, your female servant or slave. Vani yeshli arba b'nei batim. I too have 4 members of my household. Halevi v'ger v'yatom v'almana. Right, the Levi, the ger, good translation for those. The widow, the orphan, and the widow. The kulchem b'pasuk echad, and they're all in one pasuk. V'samachta b'chagecha atal b'ncha v'techa avdecha v'yamatcha v'alevi v'hager v'yatom v'almana v'sher b'kirbecha. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Ani amarti lecha, what do you have to do? Shetei mesameach et sheli ve'et shelcha b'yamim tovim shenatati lecha. You have to cause to rejoice, mine and yours in these days, in these festival days. Imasita kain, if you'll do this, afani mesameach et shelcha, I'll also cause yours to rejoice ve'et sheli. And ilu ve'elo ani atid l'samcham b'beit abachir, and also ultimately cause them to rejoice together in the temple. So here in this source, you have the sense in which the in this sense, it doesn't specifically say the poor, but it's certainly people who fall under that quality that have this sense of additional, of God caring for them, and certainly having this element of God, of God being concerned with them and caring for them. Now you also have let me just share something. One quick thing from the Midrash Rabbah. This is in 34:7 in Leviticus, in Midrash Rabbah Leviticus. Amar Rabbi Zera said, and this you don't have on the sheet, but it's 34:7 in Vayikra Rabbah. Afilu sichatan shel bnei Eretz Yisrael Torahi. Even regular conversation of people in the land of Israel, Zeres in the land of Israel, is Torah. Is Torah. HaKetzad. How do we know it? Adam omer lechaveiro. A person says to his friend, it doesn't say specifically a poor person, but it clearly is what it'll be talking about. Zakibi odakibi. Give Zakibi, give me alms, or give me Zaki Garmachbi, right? Give me alms, give me charity. By he means Zaki Garmachbi, that you are going to receive merit through me. All right. So the poor person asks for tzedakah, and he knows Torah that the person will get merit through the giving of tzedakah. Now, what's interesting also is the continuation of the Medrash says. For Rabbi Chagai said in the name, and he also said, Rabbi Chagai says, the poor man sometimes says, "Look at me, sechibi, observe me, and look at me for what I am." For Rabbi Chagai said, the name of Rabbi Yehuda, it's written, "And those riches perish by evil disposition," alluding to the fact that the rich man sometimes answers the poor man in evil disposition, saying to him, and this is so tragically modern, "Why do you not go out and work and get food to eat? Look at those dirty, look at those hips, look at those legs, look at that fat body, look at those lumps of flesh." Says the Holy One, blessed be, it's not enough you have not given him anything of your own, but you must set your evil eye upon him. What I have given him must you. Consequently, for the poor person has that chance of losing the money. Your brother becomes weak, loses all that he possessed. Now, Rabbi Chagai is very striking there because he's saying something that we certainly still you find in the what people say today about the poor. But again, it's still, but the Rabbi Zera case, another example, just this sense of getting merit, of understanding that you're receiving merit through the act of tzedakah, which again, sometimes perhaps on some level a little bit runs the risk of eliminating the actual face of the poor. Okay, a couple of other texts on this, which relate to this as well. Those of you who finished Daf Yomi recently would have studied this. It's on Shabbat Kuf Nun Vav, the end of almost the end of the Gemara in Shabbos. It's the time. I'll just read the English quickly. Shmuel, we can transfer it to Shmuel. You can also conclude Nami Ein Mazel Yisrael. Right? There's a whole debate. Is Israel affected by astrology or not? The stars, the constellations affect us. Okay, and the Gemara, this is just from the Davidson translation. The Gemara relates that Shmuel was sitting with the Gentile sage Ablet, and they saw these people going to the lake. Ablet said to Shmuel, "This person will go and he will not return because a snake will bite him and he will die." Shmuel said to him, "If he is a Jew, he will come back." As they were sitting for a while, the person they discussed went and returned. Ablet stood up, threw down the person's burden, and inside he found a snake cut and cast into two pieces, like the Hananiah story. Shmuel said to him, what did you do to merit being saved from death? The person said to him, every day we all take bread together and eat from the bread. Today there was one of us who did not have bread. And when it came time to gather the bread from each person, he was embarrassed because he didn't have any bread to give. I said to him, I will go and take the bread. When I came to the person, I'll collect the bread from everyone. When I came to this one, I rendered myself as if someone who was taking from him so that he would not be embarrassed. Shmuel said, you performed the mitzvah. Shmuel went out and taught based on this incident that even though it is written, all right, tzedakah tatzil mimavet, charity saves from death. Here you have, we saw in the Yerushalmi, that it doesn't take it literally, but it says saves from death in terms of the context of saving from, guaranteeing you eternal life. Here he reads it differently. It saves from death. Some say from an unusual death, okay, mita mishuna, but Shmuel then adds, no, we see from this case it even saves from death itself, right? It even saves from death itself. So the Yerushalmi responds to that. Here Shmuel says, yes, we have a tradition, it will save from an unusual death. All right, you won't have a normal death. That too is a blessing. But he says, no, you see from the story that charity even saves from death itself. And similarly, from that which is transcribed to Rabbi Akiva as well, it can be said, Ein Mazel Yisrael. Because Rabbi Akiva had a daughter, and Chaldean astrologers told him on the same day as she enters the wedding canopy, a snake will bite her and she will die. She was very worried about that day. On that day of her wedding day, she took an ornamental pin from her hair and stuck it in a hole in the wall for safekeeping. And it happened that it entered directly into the eye of a snake. In the morning, when she took the pin, the snake was pulled and came out with it. Her father, Rabbi Akiva, said to her, what did you do to merit being saved from the snake? She told him, in the evening, a poor person came and knocked on the door and everyone's preoccupied with the wedding feast. Nobody heard him, but I stood, took the portion you had given me and gave it to him. Rabbi Akiva said to her, you performed the mitzvah and you were saved in its merit. Rabbi Akiva went out and taught on this incident, based on this incident, Tzadik Tatzil Mimaves, charity saves from death, does not mean from Mita Mishuna, but even from death itself. Okay. So you have this tradition of this redemptive element. Now, the only problem we face with this is these are wonderful stories and the wonderful tradition, but if I were to ask, does anyone deep in their hearts really believe this as part of our ongoing reality? Well, I'll see a show of hands. Does anyone of this group really believe this is part of our ongoing reality? I see Suzanne Griffel shaking her head. No one has raised their hands that I can see. And Simcha Bob has a finger, a finger which is down no, right? So that's one of the points that Alyssa makes, is that we can see some of this tension. Again, it's important, having this notion of charity saves from death. We'll get to some other possibilities. What do you do with that verse? What do you do with that understanding? But she does point out this Gemara in Baba Basra on 10a that confronts this. She suggests confronts this in a certain open way, and this is. It was taught in the Brisa, all right? Tanya Haya Rabbi Meir Omer. Yesh lo lebal hadin lavshivcha v'lomer lecha im Elohechem ohev aniyim hu mipmeina einu mefarnasan. So Rabbi Meir taught in the Brisa that an opponent, it could be, Rashi says it could be a non-Jew, it could be an evil person, meaning someone who's an opponent, a religious opponent of yours in some sense. They'll bring the argument, and really what it's doing is Rabbi Meir is bringing the argument himself, right? If your God loves the poor, why does he not support them, right? If we find some sort of special status for the poor, why does God not support them himself? So in such a case, what should you answer him? Amar lo, say to him, Kadesh nitzol anu behen midina shel gehenim. that the reason there are poor is to save us. Again, this is a redemptive almsgiving answer. It saves us from Gehenna. Why? Because we give then tzedakah to the poor. V'zo ha'she'ila sha'al Tarnas Rufus, HaRasha at Rabbi Akiva. Right? Tarnas Rufus, the Rasha asked Rabbi Akiva, all right, same question. If God loves them, the poor, why doesn't he support them himself? Amar lo, and Rabbi Akiva gives the first answer similar. Rabbi Meir, Kadesh Nitzol, Anu Behen Medina Shel Gehenna. Because it saves us from Gehenna. Amar lo, and Tarnas Rufus says to him, Adarabba, Zusha Mechayvatan LeGehenna. No, the opposite. You're supporting the poor should send you to Gehenna. Emsholach HaMashal, give you an example. Lama Davar Doma, what's the matter compared to? Lemelech Basar V'dam, Shekas Alavdo B'chashvo B'beit Asurin. A king is angry at one of his subjects, and he puts him in prison. V'tziva alav shlo lachilo v'shlo lashkoto. And he commands you don't give him food, eat or drink. V'halach adam echad ve'achilu v'yishka. When a person goes and feeds them and gives them drink. Kishashama amelech lo koes alav. When the king hears that you violated the God's order, he's not going to be angry at you for doing that. V'atem kuruim avadim, and you are called God's slaves, God's servants. Shenemar ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim. We're God's slaves, we're God's servants. We shouldn't be going and supporting the poor if God has made them poor. All right, it's an intentional reason. Amar lo Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says no. Emshelach hamashal lemaha davar doma. What's it compared to? Lemelech basar v'dam shekas al beno. It's like a king who gets angry at his son. V'chavasho b'beit asurin, puts him in prison. V'tziva alav shel achilu v'shel ashkoto, and commands that he shouldn't give him what to eat and what to drink. V'halach adam echad ve'achilu v'yishka, when a person goes and feeds him. I just lost my place. Okay. Kishashama hamelech, when the king hears, lo daron mishagerlo, isn't he going to give him a gift? Isn't he going to be celebrating, actually, in a sense, celebrating that, giving the person a gift? Ba'anan kuriyin banim, and we are called God's children. Dichsi banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. You are children unto God. Amar, okay, and so therefore Akiva answers, no, don't view us as God's avadim. God view us as God's children. God's children do what? We help one another. And the king is pleased when we help one another. And even though the poor, God for some reason has allowed them to be poor, but it may be a fit of anger, it may be something, but ultimately God recognizes the poor as God's children. And God wants us to help, and that one's fate is not defined as one's destiny. Okay.
Michael?
Yes.
So I'm feeling very triggered by this text.
Yeah.
In part because maybe with the word sustain, which wasn't even in bold, but this implies this whole teaching of redemptive alms is really fascinating and I think really problematic, because it means that we can sustain as in like allow people not to die by feeding them poor, but we still need people to be poor in order for us to be redeemed. And that plays into current policies that impoverish people. And therefore, but now we as a community are getting woken up to how that causes problems then for people higher up with money. So I find it really problematic that this implies that we need to keep people poor, which a lot of our policies in this country have maintained, or to use a word in this translation, sustained. So we sustain people who are poor by feeding them, and somehow that redeems us. But in order for us to be redeemed, we actually need to keep people at the bottom.
No, thank you. I accept let me finish the text. I think the critique is a legitimate critique. I would just respond as follows. I don't see it as viewing it as an imperative, but as the reality is, there is some sense, there is a reality, there will always be poor. And if you also look at certainly other halachot related to the poor and tzedakah, right? Tzedakah really is originally about loaning money and getting people to sustain themselves, etc. Yes, but these texts, in the sense that some of this redemptive almsgiving text can contribute to that because it gives an importance to the poor without necessarily realizing, or the imperative to get them out of being poor, although some of it may reflect a tension between a utopian vision and a practical vision. In other words, there's always going to be poor. Not to mandate it as something ongoing, but there's always going to be poor, so we always have to confront it. But yes, the problematic of redemptive almsgiving, of charity saves from debt, it becomes about us and the poor function for us as opposed to us functioning for the poor, right? That's a legitimate critique. But let's look at the end of the text, because Alyssa Gray makes the point. Well, we'll see what she says. I'll mention what she says. Okay. All right. So that's that's Rabbi Akiva's response. The poor here for Rabbi Akiva are like children, banim. So what are you going to do to banim? Banim, you don't want to sustain them to being poor. You want to look after them, which I think is one response. Okay. Okay. Amar lo atem kurim banim ukurin avadim. But Tarnas Rufus says you are called banim and you are also called avadim. They're different verses. Bisman she'atem osim ritzono shel makom atem kruim banim. When you're doing God's will, you're called God's children. Ubisman she'ein atem osim ritzono shel makom atem kruim avadim. But when you're not doing God's will, you're not considered God's children. The achshav, this is, remember, after the Churban, maybe times of the rebellion. Hello, the achshav, einatem osim ritzono shel makom. Now you're clearly not doing God's will. You're Roman, you're slaves to Rome. All right, you're not doing God's will. Temples been destroyed. And so just the answer given here by put in the mouth probably of Rabbi Akiva is as follows. Let me just get the verse. Hold on one sec. And now this is the response. Amar lo harehu omer halo paros l'ra'ed lachnecha v'aninim mirudim tavi bayit. Ematai anim mirudim tavi bayit ha'itna v'ka'amar halo paros l'ra'ed lachnecha. Now the question is, how do we understand this answer? The translation here says, now this is the verse from the Haftorah for Yom Kippur, right? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you shall bring the poor that are cast out of your house? When do we bring the poor that are cast into our houses? Ha'idna, now. And about that very time, the verse states, is it not to share your bread with the hungry? Now, the response here that's put in Rabbi Akiva's mouth is a response that perhaps some read it as follows. When do we bring the poor that are cast out into our houses? Now, the Hebrew there is mirudim tavi bayit. Okay, when you take vaniyim mirudim, the JPS translates the wretched poor. Mirudim can be also be associated with ruling over. All right, and so some of the commentaries in the Gemara, it's not explicit. When do we bring the poor that are cast out into our own homes? Some suggest Rabbi Akiva is saying here, when do we bring those who rule over us into our own homes? Today, now that the Jews were commanded to billet the Roman soldiers. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. This works in and of itself. When do we bring the poor that are cast out of our houses? Now and every time it says, is it not to share your bread with the hungry? Now this response that I think that he's giving here is a response to this sense we are still bani. Turnus Rufus, once it says we're slaves, Rome is dominating you, and therefore there's no obligation of tzedakah. The response of Rabbi Akiva, although this is a Babylonian text, so the response of Rabbi Akiva is no. The mitzvah of tzedakah is even when we're bani, even when we're God's children, because we have the verse from Isaiah, all right? When do we bring the poor that are cast out into our houses? Ha'idna, now, even at this time of crisis, we have the mitzvah of tzedakah. And is it not to share your bread with the hungry? Isn't that what we're supposed to be, exactly what we're supposed to be doing, even in a time where we're not necessarily doing well? We always have that status of bani. We always have to help the poor. Now, what Alyssa Gray points out, what you have in this source here, is it begins with an almost a redemptive sense, right? They save us from Rimer, they save us from Gehenna. But it ends purely of doing tzedakah for what reason? Doing tzedakah for, because it's what we are obligated to do. Now, and that's the Haftorah of Yom Kippur, even at a time of crisis. Now, I'll just add to this that the verse here that's quoted is the verse from Isaiah, right? It's 58:7. The verse Munbaz quoted in the Tosefta text about tzedakah having that more redemptive element is the next verse, 58:8. Your vindicator will go before you. Again, that play on the word tzedakah. And so here we have a shift where here in the Baba Basra text, it concludes even when dealing with, at a time of crisis, what must you do? You must give tzedakah, because that's what the prophet Isaiah commanded us to do. And it doesn't end with the redemptive element. It just ends that this is what you must do, even in the time of crisis. Even in a time if you think punishment has been decreed upon you, you are still banim Lashem, and you still have to help the poor. And she sees this as perhaps the Gemara, the Bavli, moving away from the sense of that redemptive element of tzedakah, precisely because you have in the Bavli these greater challenges to the notion that reward and punishment works perfectly, and you have in the Bavli other examples of this where we said no, it doesn't work in the here and now, etc. And so it's not necessarily saving you, and that becomes cast aside. But the mitzvah of tzedakah becomes something which is ongoing, and that's the emphasis that passage ends with. Yeah, Ilana, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, thank you. This is really mind expanding. Thank you so much for bringing us these texts and for weaving them together and sharing.
I have 2 more to go, so we'll
make
a comment.
I'll make it quick.
Make a comment.
So with this last Akiva text, I can't help but really focus on the distinction between Turnus Rufus and Akiva and how they're looking at the poor. Are they servants or are they princes? Is it someone that should know their place and stay in dungeon, or is it a prince who temporarily gets a timeout from his daddy, but we all know that eventually he'll be the prince again? And I'm thinking about what's going on right now in Chicago with the looting and about the different interpretations of that. And is it a bunch of, and excuse my, quoting this language, but is it a bunch of criminals and whatever, or are these people that have pent up, anger? And it really is, I think this text crystallizes the 2 vantage points that kind of explains how
different people can have such different approaches to social unrest. If we focus not on, and I know that this is, and your whole premise is,
No,
our,
good,
you
good.
know, coming from a place of privilege, what does it do for us? But if we think about what does it mean to be poor? Is it servant or child or sibling?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate Akiva position is that it's sibling, even in a time, right? It's even in a time where you're servants and slaves, right? Rome's dominating, but right, but and that's one of the challenges. How do you live free in Rome? Well, one way was to study Torah and began created martyrs, but even at that time, that mitzvah of tzedakah, is there, independent of any redemptive element. All right, I just want to do two more things, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes to open it up, but or maybe not, but we'll see how it goes. I just want to share with you one text. Oh, it's not on the sheet. It's from Rav Shagar, who's become very popular in the past 20, 30 years in Israel. There's a little bit of his stuff in English. Some has been translated, and I was learning just with a Kellogg student. He wanted to learn some Rav Shagar, so I'm doing something from some drashot he gave years ago at Yeshiva Takolta. We were preparing one for on Elul, and then he also has one, also an Elul drasha based on the parsha of Nitzavim. Remember, Nitzavim begins, Atem Nitzavim kolchem hayom lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. You all stand before God today. Your heads, the heads of your tribes, the elders, the children, the women, the strangers, the wood choppers from the water carriers. Okay, it's a statement of everyone standing before God. And Parsha Nitzavim also has what is, according to many, not the Rambam, the source for the mitzvah of tshuva from the Torah, which comes in the a little bit right after this in Nitzavim. So Rav Shagar in this drasha is dealing with about what we talked about, tshuva tzedakah tefillah mavirin et roa hagazeh, and he wants to know what is the quality of tzedakah, why tzedakah has that potential value of mavirin et roa hagazera. So he says as follows. What is there about tzedakah? Okay, ma yichud shel tzedakah. Yesh kan shnei inyanim. Two matters here. Bechina achat shel tzedakah here rachamim. Shemerachem al lebriot merachamin alav mina shemayim. One aspect of this mercy, we have mercy on the poor. God will have mercy on us. Aval yesh no inyan nosaf. But we have another element, amuk yoter, much deeper. Hatzedakah harachamim ala zulat. Compassion on the other. Novim me ota hargasha shivyon shedibarnu aleha. It comes from the sense of equality that I spoke about before. Atem netzavim kulchem. You're all standing equally before God. Ani lo tzarich lahargish ani noten l'sheni. I don't have to feel I am giving to the other person. Kimi amar shani noten. Who said I am giving? Im yesh li yoter kesef. If I have additional money, zil mersha kesef emet shali. Does it mean that's really my money? Lama shaniya yesaveya v'hurav. Why should I be full and he be starving? Lama sheli yeh beruchniut uv'gashmiut v'lulo. Why should mine be my spirituality and his not? Hatzedakah novat mihargashat hashivyon. Tzedakah, in this ideal sense, should come from this sense of equality. Kulchem shavyon lefanai. All of you are equal before me. Hachacham v'atipesh, hatzadik v'harasha, ota hargasha goremet lekach. This feeling causes she'eni yachol largish ani noten lo, which it causes that I shouldn't feel that I am giving to him. Kishem she'en li hargasha she'ani noten li yeladim sheli o loharim sheli. Just as I don't feel I'm giving tzedakah when I'm giving to my children or my parents. Mishum shehem chelek mimeni, because they are part of me. Kach gam yachas leklal Yisrael. It's interesting, Rav Shagar adds, ulechol ha'olam. This is the relationship we should have for Israel and all the world. Zu hargasha hademokratiot amitit. This is the ultimate democratic feeling. Now he says, hargasha hazo eino novat min olam. It doesn't emerge coming out of this world. Mipnei sha'az hashivyonot hi davar zol v'choser erech. In this world, we know we don't live in an egalitarian world. This may be utopian, but at least on Yantif, on high holidays, what should motivate us is this sense of ultimate equality. Ki mitzad ha'olam yesh hebdelim bein bnei adam. For sure, there are differences. Acknowledging that, but still ideally to have this sense that everyone is equal before God, and the like, and God should have compassion upon us. So I think that's a very nice way of focusing some sense of tzedakah at this. What's the element of tzedakah at this time of the year? Is that kulchem lifnei Hashem, we are all standing equally before God. If we're all standing equally before God, then that which I have, I need enough for myself, that's legitimate. But that which I have, by definition, should be shared with others. The source is from Suzanne. This is a book, Panecha Avakesh, from Rav Shagar. Maybe what I'll do is also I'll send to Rini. I'll make a copy of it and send it to Rini. Okay, but again, this isn't a call for radical socialism. That's not what he understands. It's utopian, but there is something special about this time of the year. Okay, and one final thing in conclusion. It'll take just a few minutes. I'll read it quickly. I don't know if you're familiar with the short story called Charity from Hugh Nissenson. Are people familiar with it? Show of hands. Okay. This is a great story. It's found in Hugh Nissenson and also a book, a Shabbat Haggadah, that came out years ago by Michael Stratzfeld. And it's really actually an understanding of charity. Charity saves from death. Really, it's also a Kabbalistic understanding. You can find parallels in the Zohar, but he says it very well. I'll read it quickly. It's a few pages, but it's worth it. My mother died in the winter of 1912 when I was 12 years old. At the time, I was living with my parents in one room of a cold water flat on Ludlow Street, Manhattan's Lower East Side. My father was a finisher of men's pants. Working 12 hours a day in his rented Singer machine, he made an average of $7 a week. When I went to school, my mother helped him sewing on buttons and buckles. After school, I would help deliver the pants. All told, we cleared a little over $10 a week. We paid $14 a month rent and ate very little: a roll, a cup of chicory-flavored coffee for breakfast, bowl of soup for lunch, crust of rye bread, pickles for supper. I always went to bed hungry. The only time we splurged on food was on Friday nights in celebration of Shabbat. As a religious Jew, my father insisted on it. We scrimped and saved all week, but Friday, we knew we'd have a good dinner, and Friday morning, my mouth watered in anticipation. When I got home, the table, the one we owned, was already with candlesticks, plates, and little rosebuds. There'd be challah, a goblet of wine, a plate of stuffed carp, sweet and sour meat, roast potatoes, and candied carrots. Soup, chicken again, made from legs and wings, always came last. And for dessert, the ultimate, picha, calf's foot jelly, which he had cooked that afternoon and set on the fire escape to cool. Mother would light the candles, make the brachas, and after Kiddush, we would eat. Then my father would turn to our guest with a nod and invite the guest to begin eating. We always had a guest on Friday night, someone even poorer than we and alone, who had no place to go on Shabbat. It was a religious obligation for my father to find a beggar or a starving teacher. They would wash their hands in the sink, mumble their prayers, and smacking their wrinkled lips begin to eat, make grunting noises deep in their throats. Sometimes on cold nights, my father would invite them to stay with us, and they would snore, making it impossible to sleep. Papa, I'd complain. He says, "Oh, shush, it's okay. Tzedakah tatzil mimaves, charity saves from death." He quoted the words from the Bible, a Hebrew, in a resonant voice that never failed to shut me up. I would lie awake in the dark, listening to the mingled sounds of the snoring, the wheezing and occasional cough, along with the stirring of mice across the floor. The room was freezing. Coal was too expensive to keep the stove burning all night. Very often in the morning, my water would be frozen solid. Then quite suddenly in the middle of December, my mother caught pneumonia. She woke on a Wednesday about midnight with a splitting headache and severe chill. Looked as if she had been slapped. And she was in agony, and she'd say it painful as a knife, she whispered. Convulsed by a short, dry cough, she lay in bed 2 more days. When she drew her breath, her nostrils were distended. Her dark eyes were bright. I'd never seen them so beautiful. I wanted to kiss her quivering lips, but her coughing and the barking sounding cough it made me claw and made her raise herself, claw at the right side. She began to spit blood. In semi-delirium, she babbled half-remembered legends from her childhood. Is it snowing? She asked me. Yes. Ah, she said, but not there, never there. Where, my father asked, where do you think? Where there are fruit trees, fruit with golden trees, always in bloom, apple trees, grapes, etc. And then he rubbed her moist hands and said, Malka, listen, this kind of talk is forbidden. Do you understand me? It's absolutely forbidden. One must want to live. I've been a good wife, haven't I? She asked. Of course, I've tried. God knows I've tried to be a good wife and mother. Of course you have. I'm glad. I've read, when a righteous is about to enter paradise, the angels come and strip off the... Stop it, my father yelled. When I came home that Friday afternoon, a doctor was there from the hospital on 2nd Avenue and 17th Street. It was a tall German Jew. Yes, the crisis, he said, will come in a week, maybe a little less. The crisis? I said, what's that? Crisis is a crisis, my boy. Simple as that. She'll continue to get worse. Maybe she'll get better, but she'd have a much better chance in the hospital. What's that? My father asked in Yiddish. What's he saying? It's up to you, but that's my considered professional opinion. A hospital, my father repeated. No. I knew he was thinking of the hospitals in Russia from when there was a shack and no one ever came out of it. People were sent there to die. My mother coughed. The doctor glanced at the face of a gold watch. Well, this is America, Papa. Mama says, Papa, the doctor says you have a better chance at the hospital. My father said, okay, good. I'll make the arrangements. And when I'd wrapped my mother in my own quilt stuffed with goose feathers, my father said, Oi, God forgive me, I almost forgot. What? You'll have to do the shopping. For what? For Shabbos. What do you think? Tonight? Well, tonight's Shabbos. I'm not hungry tonight, I said, but our guest will be. Tonight? Why should tonight be different from every other Friday night? My mother coughed into her handkerchief, and then she saw it was soaked with blood. Listen to your father, she whispered. No, do as he tells you, she said. So I went down to Hester Street, and in spite of the bitter cold and grimy slush, I bought some food. And then I realized, I understood. It was a mitzvah my father was performing, a good deed, a holy act, which bound together the upper and nether worlds, hastening redemption of Israel. I glanced at the low clouds hanging just above the city, and the reddish glow was a sign heavens and earth had come together. And tonight of all nights, when it was a matter of life and death, my father's charity would not go unrewarded. So by the time I reached home, my mother was gone, but there with my father was a tall, emaciated, stoop-shouldered man wearing a ragged black frock coat and a black silk hat. This is Rev Rifkin, said my father. I know, good Shabbos, and good Shabbos to you. I'd seen him around the neighborhood for years. He was a broken-down Hebrew teacher, lived in the shul on Essex Street, where he slept in a tiny unheated room behind the Aron. Said the rats had once attacked him and bitten off one of his toes. Shivering, he warmed his blue hands over the coal stove while my father and I prepared supper. We only had a little bit that week. We'd only had $2. There was a little chicken soup with raisins, half a loaf of challah, the head of a carp, a bowl full of raisins and almonds, and steaming hot tea. God bless you, he said, Rifkin after the meal, wiping his beard. Would you believe it, except for a little salted herring and glass of tea, the only thing I've had in my mouth for 6 days is God is my witness 6 whole days. A little color already seeped into his thin face. He gazed to the above and to the left. How's Mama? I asked my father. In God's hands. How true, Rifkin said. Aren't we all? If I hadn't gone for a walk on Ludlow, I'll met you. I'd be in my room now, lying in the dark. You know, the rats there eat my candles. When can we visit her? I went on. Tomorrow. I heard the sad news, Rifkin says, but don't worry a thing. God willing, she'll be well in no time. I hope so, my father said. How can you doubt it? Cried Rifkin. God is just, but he's merciful too. To whom he will not show his mercy, if not to a fine woman like that and her husband who feed the starving? We shall see, my father said. Well, I should be going, Rifkin said. Nonsense, it's snowing. You'll stay here tonight. and you can join us for lunch in the morning. No, I wouldn't think it. I insist. Oh, okay, I'll stay. As I expected, Rifkin snored, not only snored, but whistled. I couldn't sleep. I got up and went with my blanket wrapped around my shoulders and went out to the landing. We lived on the 4th floor. The building reeked of urine and toilets at the end of each hallway and the smell of cooked cabbage, fresh fried onions and fish. There was the whir of sewing machines. To make ends meet, God help us, some Jews were forced to work on Shabbat. But the words of the proverb rang in my head, but he has mercy on the poor. But one who has mercy on the poor, happy is he. Jacob, is that you? My father whispered and went back into the room. Yes, Papa. Are you all right? Fine, Papa. Come here a minute. What's the matter? I can't sleep. Neither could I, but I feel much better now. Do you? Why? Because Mama will get well. How can you be so sure? You said so yourself. Did I? When did I say she'll be well? You said that charity saves from death. But what's that got to do with Mama? I said everything. He raised his voice. Is that what you think a mitzvah is? A bribe offered the Almighty? But I responded, you said so. You said charity saves from death. I insisted. No, no, my father said, not Mama. Him. Charity saves God from death. So it's a great story. Great story by Hugh Nissenson. And it also really reflects certainly Zohar sources and certain Kabbalistic sources that when we do an act of tzedakah, it's also an act of that affects the Sfirot and giving to God. You can look up in the Zohar, if you have Mishnat Zohar by Tishbi, you can see an example of that there. Okay, it's 10:34. I'm willing to stay on for a few minutes if people have questions and comments.
Would you be able to send that story also to Rini? Because it's beautiful.
Yeah, all right, I'll have to, yeah, okay. It'll take a little bit just to copy it, but yeah. I tried to find it online, but I couldn't, but I think I'll be able to. Yeah, yeah. No, it's a great story.
I actually found online Esquire has a version. It's not exactly the same, but I was reading along, and if you just
well,
Google.
I left out a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, so can you send the link?
Yeah, let me get it up again, and I'll send it.
Why don't you send the link so
It's a
we'll have
weird
it there.
spelling because I haven't transcribed it, but it was neat to see. Thank you.
Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, it was a great shiur, but this whole notion of tzedakah tatzil mimavet bothers me, and none of the sources, of course, mention. You know, in Avot we have the statement that we're supposed to serve God, and that presumably means by doing the mitzvot, including giving tzedakah, like an evet shelo al manat lekabel pras, and that didn't come. That notion that doing the mitzvah just for the sake of doing the mitzvah of helping the poor person didn't come through in any of these sources. It's all the benefit that one reaps from it.
Yeah, except, well, I would say as follows. I mean, I'm focusing on these sources because I thought they were interesting.
Right, I think
there's obviously other sources. Alyssa's point is that you find this notion, as I mentioned, more in Palestinian literature than in the Bavli, and she suggests that the Bavli is already reacting to an awareness that things don't work so simply that you do a mitzvah and you're immediately protected, and the awareness and that awareness of that's not the way things work. So there's a certain tension there, and nonetheless, though, we do have these stories, and they're there. And it points to a certain importance of tzedakah, that it takes on something beyond. It takes on something beyond itself. Okay, I mean, we still say tshuva tzedakah tefillah mavir neroah d'zera. However, we understand that there is an importance to tzedakah in particular that takes on something beyond itself. There is, again, a problematic part is what happens to the face of the poor. That's a legitimate issue. Alyssa goes into various things about how much Chazal in the narrative stories are actually intersecting directly with the poor, as opposed to through a kuppah, through the chest, the tamchui. You find in some Babylonian sources, there's a certain danger of encountering the poor, that or can lead to certain crisis. If you think of the story of Tanur Shalach Noi, the end of the story is that Rabbi Elazar's wife, Ima Shalom, wouldn't let him fall to his face, say Tachanun, because he'd worried, called divine justice, how he was wounded and hurt and how he was treated. And that one time a poor person came to the door and Ima Shalom had to go answer the door to help the poor person. And it was the time when Rabbi Elazar would be saying apparently Tachanun, perhaps, or falling in his face. And so she doesn't prevent them from doing it, and Rabban Gamliel dies because he was the one in charge. So she raises some of these issues. Now, I don't want to say, it's not all sages did this or all sages did that. You certainly have stories of encounter there. But this was just, I think, an interesting theme that comes up, and it's also related to the high holidays. And I think it's a theme that is there, but I think has these problematic elements to it. And for her also, the Baba Batra passage she sees as sort of a model Babylonian passage at the end, because you shift from it'll save you from a difficult death or whatever to the end of what? No, we're not talking about tzedakah redeeming. We're talking about what, even at a time of crisis, what should you do? You have to do tzedakah, and there's no promise given. There's no promise given at all. Now, one person, there was someone wrote a commentary on that in Haaretz, a fellow Yaakov Meir. You can find it, Yaakov Meir. You can find it on Haaretz if you do a search, because he wants to read it that it's really something that God will return the people to the house, and the house is the temple, and it's a subversive statement, but he seems to be reading a lot into it that it's not explicitly on the surface by any means. And Alyssa Gray's point is that it's just there, it's doing it because that, in that sense, is what one is supposed to be doing. And it ends like that. And now she does suggest it's, she says as follows, the Bavli's ambiguity, particularly that story in Baba Basra, is a mark of its position about redemptive almsgiving. The Bavli editors were heirs to the ideas of it, yet they were not certain of it. They were not as certain of it as the Palestinian editors of the Munbas, as the Munbas narrative. Okay, and then she suggests why they were uncertain. One is that element in which Bavli already recognizes things don't work, so simply, and also that wanting to deal more anonymously with the poor, so with the community chest, etc., and some other things. So also you can check out the article for more detail. Great. But yeah, I'm not but I'm just saying those ideas are there. And I think how we react to them and what we do with them, and I certainly love the Unisson story and the whole shift that, I mean, and it's not, and again, it's taken away in Zohar, Kabbalah. I mean, it builds on Kabbalistic reasoning that, we do mitzvot not for ourselves, but sorech gavoha, for the higher, for God. And this notion, charity saves God from death, it's not just, it's more than a drush of solving the problem. I think there's really something to it. Okay, anyone else? Okay, if not, we should stop here. Some people left already because I went a little bit over, but thank you. I hope this was helpful. I really enjoyed. Sorry we couldn't do this in person, but I really enjoyed this opportunity to see everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. Yasher Koach.
Okay, take care.
Very nice, Michael.
Good. Yeah, no, this was fun. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing okay. I thought this was at 10 o'clock. I was so embarrassed.
Is that what happened?
For 10 years, we've been doing a 10 o'clock Wednesday.
I dafka started that way at the beginning. I said, I started that way at the beginning, and I said we were doing it at 9 because we don't have to worry about travel. Yeah. I said we would start at 10, so people in the western suburbs wouldn't have to fight traffic.
For 10 years, I was on an 8. I was supposed to take over for between you and me. I don't know. Rini didn't mention it, I'm sure, but I was supposed to take over for Rini because
Rini was on at the beginning.
Yeah.
At the very beginning.
So
Yeah.
I started at 10 after 8, and I emailed her and I texted her. I said, I can't get on. You didn't give me the right thing, thinking it's 10 o'clock. So I went out for a walk with Meady. So
is that funny?
I'm in the middle of my walk, and Rini calls me back. It's 10 to 9. And she says, I'm sorry, I didn't give you the right stuff. I said, okay, well, listen, I'll be at my computer and I'd like to make you the host. So I said, okay, I'll be at my computer in a half hour and you can make me the host. But it was already 10 to 9. She didn't say like, well, the meeting starts in 10 minutes. So when I got back at a quarter after 9, I jumped on and I see the meeting's already going. I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm given one piece of responsibility and I blow it.
It's fine. It's
anyway.
fine. So you're hanging in, the shul's hanging in?
Yeah. I don't know how other shuls are finding their membership, but we're like 20% down in terms of the responses that have come in this time. So everybody's kind of worried about that. And our Hebrew school, is also at this time last year we had 20% more students. So people are worried about it.
It's such a crazy time.
Yeah. How are you doing? So how's
I'm doing okay. I'm being very careful.
Yeah.
The only thing I've been going to is I've had a bunch of dentist appointments.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I'm not going out. I mean, I go for walks with my wife, but I am not going out. Myra will go shopping every few weeks. But yesterday I ordered from Whole Foods, and they deliver.
Yeah.
I ordered during the day, they deliver. Myra will go to, get certain more kosher products. I'm ordering off Amazon, a bunch of stuff. So we have, so that's good. So I'm feeling okay and managing. But this whole thing is bizarro. And this whole thing is bizarro. I mean, I went to a lot of Hartman sessions this summer online and, so I'm keeping myself busy and it was fun. I hope this session worked okay. I mean,
it was great. It was great.
Yeah, but it was fun preparing and I have a couple kavrusas during the week and, which is nice and playing more bridge.
Okay, I didn't know you played.
Yeah, I like bridge. So I'm playing a little more on the computer. I usually play once a week.